So procedure, this is basically if somebody told you, pick up this Bible, and you said, okay, I picked up this Bible. You have followed the procedure or the rule. Something has told you to do that, and you've followed that rule. And then heart, on the other hand, this is referring to your will. David, he was a man after God's own heart. And do you know why? It's because his will, what he willed to do, was aligned with God's will and what God desired to have happen. And so that's why a lot of times when we pray, we say, I pray that this is within your will. This is within your heart. Our hearts are aligned in this way. But this is not to say that David didn't sometimes stumble. Sometimes his will was off and it didn't align with God's, and he was doing the incorrect methods. But overall, what God wanted to be accomplished was able to be accomplished through David because their hearts were aligned so that they could be a man after God's own heart. And so, and then over here we got a little bit of the background information. I think that's going to help us understand this procedure and heart issue, is why we should even be discussing this at all. So the Old Testament, what was the purpose of it? What was the purpose of this Old Testament? And the first thing that should come to mind is the remission of sins. This was, Jesus died on the cross so that we can have the forgiveness. Now we are living under the New Testament. Now we are able to have this forgiveness. That's why we are able to take part in this communion, because Jesus really did die on the cross. So that's the first part, is that Jesus died on the cross, getting rid of that Old Testament. We are able to have this forgiveness of sins. And the second big reason is that Jesus had nailed those old laws, those old ordinances, those old rules to the cross. So we are no longer bound to those things of the Old Testament. We are free of those things. And in fact, we are under the law of liberty. We are under a time of grace. We are no longer under these strict and difficult laws of the Old Testament. And this is a beautiful thing. Because somebody was asking me the other day, they said, well, why do you even want to talk about procedure and heart? And I said, this is why. Because if we don't understand that these very harsh procedures, these rules of the Old Testament and what we did away with, then we don't realize how beautiful we have it now. Today, we don't have to follow under all those old rules, that old law. We are done away with those things. That is why this is a topic worth talking about, because those procedures are done with. Okay. And there's one big question that I wanted to address here too as well, is was anybody able to follow the Old Testament? You know, I think a lot of people, they say, it was too hard, nobody can do it, this. But that's interesting here, because there was one man that it says that he may have been able to follow outside of Jesus. Yes, Jesus was perfect. But there's also Job. A lot of people, I think, they overlook Job. If you look at Job 1:1, it says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Isn't that interesting? They refer to Job as somebody who was perfect and upright. Does that mean he never sinned? I don't think so. I think that there was only one person that ever lived that never sinned. But it refers to him, I think, figuratively as this person that was really, he was doing it. He was actually following the law, and it was very, very impressive. But at the same time, you know, if he fell short of one thing, even Job, if he fell short of one thing, he was still a transgressor of the law. Even Job would not have made it without Jesus. He still required Jesus. I mean, there was an entire book dedicated to Job, because it was so fantastic that somebody was able to follow God so closely. And in fact, he followed him so closely that the devil was just like, wait a minute, how is this possible? He's like, you must have a hedge about him. God, you must be protecting this man, because this should be too hard for him to handle, and he's got it. He can handle this. Very interesting here. So today we are under the law of liberty. So James chapter 2, verses 10 through 12, it says, for whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. So even Job was not able to be free of this. If Jesus never came, even Job would not have made it. Verse 11, for he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. If you committed any sin in the old law, you were a transgressor. You were a transgressor. Everybody living under the old law was a transgressor. That is why Jesus had to come. And this is the beauty of verse 12. Of James chapter 2, verse 12, this is us today. So speak ye, and so do, as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. That is what we are under today. We are no longer bound to those things because Jesus has nailed them to the cross. We are free from those old procedures, those old laws, those old rules. We are now under this new time, the law of liberty. And we should rejoice in that because those things of the Old Testament were very, very hard. Okay, so we've already defined procedure as rules, laws, and ordinances. And then heart, I wanted to read the verse that I was referring to here. Acts chapter 13, verse 22. It says, "And when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I found David, the son of Jesse, a man after mine own heart, which shall fulfill all my will." And that was the key here. That's how I came up with this definition of what a heart is, because I believe the Bible gives the exact definition. It says that David was a man after mine own heart, because it says, which shall fulfill all my will. The reason why is because his will was aligned with God's. That's kind of like when Paul talks about how he is crucified with Christ. He's like, not my will, but thine, and how he's aligned himself in that way. He is dead to his old ways. He's aligned himself in such a way. And this is how we ought to be. We need to have our hearts aligned with what God desires. Okay? Okay, and so then we're on the next part here. And so the first example I want to talk about is procedure, so rules and heart together, or will together. Procedure and heart. So James chapter 2, verse 21, it says, "Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect?" So Abraham's heart, or his will, was to do that of the Father. So when God went up to him, he said, I want you to take your son, Isaac, and I want you to go and take him up on the mount, and I want you to sacrifice him. He goes, okay, my heart, my will, is to do that of the Father, because he's commanded me to do such. And what was the rule? He said, I want you to sacrifice him. But what's interesting here is look at Abraham's heart. This is why I think this is such a beautiful topic here, is because did he know why God was having him sacrifice his son? He didn't. He absolutely did not know why, but he just simply had a heart, a will for obedience, to follow the rule, frankly, pretty blindly. You know, if somebody said, go drive off that cliff, it'll all be good. If God said, do it. I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, it'd be the same thing. There's death at stake. There was the worst thing possible that could happen, and it's saying that was what they were supposed to follow blindly. Please don't do that. Please don't just hear a voice in your head and think I need to go do that crazy. I'm saying I think that he had a relationship with God where he was able to know when God really was speaking to him. I think it was audible. I think he heard it directly. I don't think it's the kind of relationship necessarily that we might have today. I'm not going to put restrictions on God, but I think he had a very special relationship with God. So we can see procedure and heart working together here. And they're very, very difficult to separate. Because if you did an action, if Kirsten told me, she goes, go wash the dishes. I want to please my wife, so I'm going to go do it, and I'm going to go wash the dishes. So I followed the rule of my wife, and my will was to please her. But what's interesting here is that procedure can also be separated. These rules can also be separated. And here's the example that we're given here, is in 1 Samuel 6 and 19. Here's the situation. So remember Eli and his wicked sons that were the priests, and they brought out the ark of the Lord, and they thought that this was going to be their secret weapon to help them in battle. But it was a major mistake because God didn't want them to bring out the ark into battle. This was just simply, they're like, well, it's helped us in the past. You know, remember Jericho, how they circled around the city and then they were all able to shout and the wall fell? They're like, well, let's do it. But the problem was, that wasn't what God, that wasn't the rule that they had, that they were asked to do. So they lost this ark, and sure enough, it had been gone. And let's read about it here. So 1 Samuel 6:19, it says, and he smote the men of Bethshemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,000 and 60 men, and the people lamented because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. So what had happened is, after it was taken, it eventually got to these people of Beth Shemesh. And so this was not their ark. It was supposed to be with the children of Israel. But there was a rule that they were not supposed to do. They opened up the ark of the Lord, and they looked inside, and it tells us that 50,070 men died because they broke a rule. This is the Old Testament. And this is why there's the beauty of talking about procedure and heart today. Because look at this. We are not bound to a rule. If we look, if we don't, if we broke some rule today, if we were speeding, this is not going to kill 50,000 people. We're not bound to a rule that has this severity today. And so those people, they looked inside, and it was devastating. But the reason I say that this procedure was separate from the heart is because, okay, maybe 5 or 10 people opened up this ark, but what about the other 50,000? It didn't matter what their heart was, right? They're done. They broke the rule. God said, don't do this. Don't break this. It didn't matter what they thought. Their heart, it didn't matter. And that's the beauty of being out of this. Being out of those difficult procedures, because it doesn't matter. It didn't always matter what your heart was. Think about Uzzah. The ark is falling, and he tries to stop it. He had broken a rule. Some people would like to argue that Uzzah's heart was in the wrong place. His will was in the wrong place. He shouldn't have been anywhere near that ark. I would have to agree. It is difficult to separate the two. We can also look at Nadab and Abihu. They used strange fire. They had broken the rule, and it was punishable by death. But the interesting thing here is David, when he breaks some of these rules, God's a bit more patient with him. It's interesting here. I'm not saying that just because you broke a rule in the Old Testament that it was always the result was death. Sometimes God would look on the heart, but it would be an incorrect statement to simply say the Old Testament was only about the heart. And I've heard that statement, and it is incorrect. The Old Testament was not only about your heart. Just because you willed to do the right thing did not mean that you were going to be saved from certain death. from some death. In this case, the people of Beth Shemesh, that's a bummer to those 50,000. I mean, that's a bummer. It may not have mattered if they knew or not. God was like, this is a horrible crime. Do not open this up, and if you do, you have broken the procedure. And if you want to look at more procedures, oh man, just start going through Leviticus, right? Let's read a couple of verses here, and I want us to get into the heart of the matter here. Leviticus 1, verses 11 through 15. We're just going to read a couple of verses here. Leviticus chapter 1, verse 11. And it says, "And he shall kill it on the side of the altar northward before the Lord." Catch that? God tells him, he tells him, he says, when you're doing the sacrifice, when the Levites, the people who were the royal priesthood at that time, when they were supposed to do a sacrifice, it says, kill it on the side of the altar northward. And you're just like, wait a minute, God, why did you need it to point north? But you know what was interesting? It didn't matter. It didn't matter what they thought about it. The procedure was, God told you, and you did it. Okay, let's keep going. There's plenty more examples of this here. And it says, "And the priests, Aaron's sons, shall sprinkle his blood round about upon the altar." So why did they sprinkle the blood? It's a little bit more obvious to us, but at that time, that was just a shadow of things to come. To us today, we're like, of course they would sprinkle the blood. This had to do with Jesus. In the atonement of sins, we recognize the power of the blood. But to them, they hadn't seen Jesus yet. All they had was prophecies. And so, the procedure was of the utmost importance in the Old Testament. Let's keep going here. I really want to make sure this rings true here. And it says in verse 12, "And shall cut it into his pieces." You might ask yourself, why did you need to cut it into pieces? God knew. Did it matter if they knew? No, it didn't matter. With his head and his fat, why was it only the head and the fat? Why wasn't it the legs and the belly? I don't know. Why did God... But it didn't matter. And so if anybody tells you the Old Testament is simply about the heart, that would be an incorrect statement. The vast majority is procedure, 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 procedure. And this is becoming more and more of a new wave thing. I was even watching a YouTube video, and this guy was saying, yeah, and he's, this hippie guy, and he's just like, it was still all about the heart. it's all about the heart. She's like, no, man, that's like, if you can't figure out that the Old Testament was mostly procedural, that's a major issue. Because now today, while we are under the law of liberty, that's the beauty. We can recognize that we are past those procedures. We are past those rules. This is how we can feel our freedom. And then let's keep going. I mean, the amount of precision in the procedure was intense. And it says, and the priest shall lay them in order on the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. It needed to be in order. It needed to be cut in a certain way. Continuing on. But he shall wash the inwards and the legs with water. I mean, it's just like procedure, 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 procedure. If anybody needs to understand this topic more further than what they are, if they think this is hard, say read the book of Leviticus. Read the whole book. It's all about procedure, over and over and over and over. It's all about procedure. You can also talk about the purely procedural example of the people of Beth Shemesh, how over 50,000 people died because they broke procedure. They broke the rules. Okay, and so now it comes to why should we care today? Why is this so important? We've already talked about the significance of the beauty of being under the law of liberty. But now, you remember how I was talking about the 2:30 talks? And one of the ones that came up is we were talking about the holy kiss and how we should approach it. And I begged the question, I said, do you think that this is a procedural issue of the holy kiss, or do you think this is a heart issue? Please don't think I have the right answer here. I pray with all humility. The reason I'm talking about this topic is I want to equip us with how to approach the scriptures. This is not to say I'm right. This is simply to say, if you see a topic and this is causing problems, or there's something that we don't understand, maybe this is one perspective to look at it. I'm not saying I have the Holy Kiss section down perfectly. I don't know if I have this right. I'll just admit that. Please, with all humility, that's how we're going to approach this topic. I just needed a topic in the New Testament to approach, and one that's not, I'm not trying to cause problems here. So step one, is it procedural or heart with the Holy Kiss? And a little fun fact, the Holy Kiss, it's referred to 7 times. So people that say, it's not referenced very much, 7 times it comes up. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Greet one another with a holy kiss. And in fact, 4 times it says specifically holy kiss. And so is this something that we should just be like, whoop? I'm just not even going to discuss it. I think it is worth discussion. I definitely think it is worth discussion. So now let's think. I want to prime you. Is this procedure or heart? And let's read about an example. And I think Jesus tells us which way it goes. I think he gives us the answer to this one. Luke 7:44-50. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss. But this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. So I want you to picture this. So Jesus is there in this house, and in this woman, she goes up, and she has not ceased to kiss Jesus' feet. She's just loving on Jesus and loving him and loving him. And Jesus is calling them out. He's saying, that woman is being hospitable. That woman is loving on me. That woman is precious. You guys are not. I came in here, and you're like, oh, there's Jesus. And they just, there's like, whatever. I remember, I think it's one of Alden's Facebook posts. He goes, in my time, when you walked into a room, you said hi to the people. And I don't know if Alden remembers posting that or not, but that's a concept, and I think I probably fall victim to it today. Sometimes I walk into a room, I just sit down, go on my phone. But I think there was a time when you walked into a room and you always would say, hello folks, how you all doing? And you greeted them. And in fact, I think there's even biblical backing for this. And it says, So thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman since the time I came in hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved me much. For she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. And they that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves, Who is that forgiveth sins also? And he said to the woman, Thy faith hath saved thee. Go in peace. She was saved by this love. And so now the question is, when she went in there and gave him that kiss, yes, she was following procedure. But who else kissed Jesus? Who else kissed him? Judas Iscariot also kissed Jesus. Was he saved? Did Jesus, when he got a kiss from Judas Iscariot, did he say, "Thy sins are forgiven, Judas. You will be saved"? Judas followed the procedure. He gave a holy kiss. Did he do the will of the Father? Did he do the will of Jesus? No, he did not. Did she do the will of him? Was she loving Jesus? I think that this is very clear here. In this example, I think you have to look at every example. So that's why I'm saying, with all humility, don't think I have the answer to this topic. I'm saying this is just something to consider here. Is that when she came in, Jesus was emphasizing here that her heart, her love, her hospitality is what saved her, not the kiss. I think that's of the utmost importance. And one other topic here, I was telling somebody in that group, I was saying, because she was asking me, she said, do you think that you ought to, do you think that you should do the holy kiss? Is this the same thing as all other topics in the New Testament? And my answer was, I said, okay, so in the Church of Christ, if somebody comes in here, it doesn't matter how, honestly, how many sins they have. This could be a serial killer. It could be anybody. And if they come in here, if they want to hear, if they want to learn, if they want to learn a little bit more about Jesus, any sinner can come in here and listen. They are welcome to hear the Word of God. They are welcome to hear this. And that is what I want us to be standing for here. And so, but get this, in that process, sometimes there is known perverts. There is known disgusting people that will come into churches. And you know that person. You know that they have issues. And we still want them to attend. Don't get me wrong. But I asked that person, I said, if a known pervert, sometimes you know it. It's like there's no gossip. It's a known fact that somebody is a nasty person. Typically a man. It's a bummer, but typically it's men who are the nasty ones. And so if there's a known pervert, I said, okay, he walks in, kiss him. And she goes, she's like, you got me. And I was just like, I wouldn't kiss him. And I was like, but you've not followed the rules, right? Greet one another with a holy kiss. It says it so many times. Why have you broken this rule? And I was just like, clearly there's a heart to consider here, isn't there, too? There's a heart. I think that's of the utmost importance to consider that. I personally think that this topic is one of the heart. I think, and here's the thing. I only applied this to holy kiss, and this can be applied to many different issues of how you approach it. I'm not saying I have the right answers, but I'm saying this is simply a way to look at it. If it says do this, you're like, why should we do this? Is it because there's a rule that we need to do it, or is it because we need to have the correct heart? And I think that this is how we should approach every issue. Is it procedure or heart? Is it procedure or heart? And I think that can help us significantly. And so another question here is, so now that we're under the law of liberty, are there any procedures? Are there any at all? I would say there is. I would say there is. And the reason why I say this is because the first question is, the person who wrote the majority of the New Testament is Paul. And I want to ask you guys, and this is rhetorical, you don't have to answer it out loud, but was Paul an apostle? And you'd say, yes, Paul was an apostle. You'd say, was what he taught inspired? And you would say, yes, I think what he taught was inspired. Was what he taught truthful? And you would say, yes, I think what he taught was truthful. So if he tells us in a universal way that we ought to do something, I personally think that he is somebody, he's an apostle, he is somebody, God is speaking through him. What he is saying is inspired. I think that we ought to follow that if he commands us to do those things. If he says God is telling you that this is the way that you ought to act, then we ought to follow what Paul is teaching us here. One example here is cutting hair. And this is not even to say one way or the other, but this is simply to say that when he was talking about this topic, he was simply talking about it in a way that I think is applying to all people. 1 Corinthians 11:1, it says, and so this is the question. This is the main question I want you, while I'm reading this, is ask yourself, is this only to the Corinthians, or is this, I'll just put universal. I'll put universal for uni. And that's the question. Is it this one, Corinthians, or universal? Who is Paul talking to here? Why is he saying this? In 1 Corinthians 11:1, it says, "Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ." So we don't have anything to determine it quite yet, if it's the Corinthians or if it's universal. Verse 2, "Now I praise you, brethren, that ye remember me in all things, and keep the ordinances as I have delivered them to you." So if we just have verse 2, it's looking like it's going only to the Corinthians, right? It's looking like he said, I'm telling this to you. But then if we keep going, this is what's interesting here. It starts becoming more universal of who it's talking to. Verse 3, it says, "But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God." So that's one of our keys. Is it if we're trying to figure out if this is just the Corinthians or universal, it says every man. Every. So that word is going to come up over and over. This is a universal concept. This is talking to every person because he's talking about it in this manner. And it keeps going. He is very precise to say, don't miss this. I'm not just talking to the Corinthians. Verse 3, "But I would have you know that the head of," so we read that, verse 4, "every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head." So we have every twice. 1, 2. Now we're on to the next one. "But every woman," in verse 5, we're on to 3 everys. "But every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered dishonoreth her head, for that is even all as if she were shaven. For the woman being not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God. But the woman is the glory of the man." So it says here, a universal principle. He is the image and glory of God. So over and over, we see evidence that this was written to all people. All people. But if he says, hey, just Corinthians, do this, then I'd be like, yeah, he's probably just talking to the Corinthians, right? And here's another topic. Logan and I were talking in great length about this because Logan knows a lot more about this topic than I do. It's the concept of slavery. And there's the verse that refers to it says that a servant, which if you look at the Greek word there, it's actually closer to slave. It's doulos. And I said, I was like, Logan, I said, if there was slavery today, in the U.S., would we have, and that was my big question for him, I said, would we have to, if you were a slave, are you still supposed to be obedient to your master? And we said we couldn't find a verse that discredited it. And that was the issue. But here's the thing, though, is this is still, there's a degree of trying to decipher this because we don't have slavery. So he was talking to them to a certain extent. I still think it's a universal principle, but it still has to apply to you if that even applies in your lives. Because we've already abolished slavery. It no longer applies to our nation. There no longer is a slave. And so if somebody did try to put you in a slave, we're also supposed to try to uphold the laws of the land. So you would say, no, I'm not being obedient to my master because this is breaking the law. But if that was the law, if there was to be slavery in servants, Logan and I personally could not find where we would say this does not apply to us. And so this is not to say that we're right, but this is an essential question for us. Is it just to the people he's talking to, or is it universal? In my opinion, we need to look at each context and each example and determine these things. I think for 100% certainty, we can say that. Well, maybe not 100%, but pretty certain. If he keeps saying every, and talks about the image of God, we can determine that. Okay, that's all I had on the lesson. I hope that it was helpful to you guys and that you can apply this. Anytime that there's a difficult topic, ask yourself, is that a procedure or heart issue? Is it simply a rule to follow, or is there a bigger issue behind this, which is the heart? And I'll tell you what, the Old Testament was mostly procedural. The New Testament is mostly heart. We are right now under this law of liberty, and this is the beauty of this, is that our main goal is to try to do the will of the Father and align our hearts as close as we can, similar to David, and try to be men and women that are after God's own heart. I never want to end any lesson without going over the plan of salvation, which is to hear, believe, repent of our sins, confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. And if anybody would like the prayers of the church, they can come forward as we sing the song of invitation.